two men, two prison cells, 1,500 years apart. One in 6th century Italy, locked in a stone cell waiting to be executed for treason against the king. The other in 21st century America, doing a bid for choices the streets pulled him into. Different worlds, different centuries, different lives in every way you could measure. But they found the same truth, and they found it in the same place. A cage, a place where everything gets stripped away. No distractions, no noise, no escape from your own mind. Just you and whatever thoughts you've been running from your whole life. Most people fear that kind of silence. They'll do anything to avoid it. Fill every moment with content, conversation, consumption, anything to keep from sitting alone with themselves. But these two men didn't have a choice. The silence was forced on them. And in that silence, something spoke that had been waiting their whole lives to be heard. This is the story of what they found. I got a text message on New Year's Eve from my friend. Known him since 6th grade. We grew up together, came from the same streets, same struggle. But life took us different directions. I found my way out. He found his way in, into the system, into the cells, into years of his life spent behind walls. But we never lost the connection. The whole time he was locked up, we stayed in touch. Letters at first, back when that's all there was. Then video calls when they started allowing those. I'd see his face on a screen, him in that jumpsuit, and we'd talk like nothing changed. Because between us, nothing did. He was my brother. Blood couldn't have made us closer. When he finally came home, I thought we had time. I thought we'd build something together, make up for all those years. I had plans for us, ideas, a future I could see. That's not how it went. New Year's Eve, he sent me a message. I didn't know it would be one of the last things he'd ever say to me. He said, "If I don't get to talk to you personally, bro, Happy New Year. Life is short and we are never promised tomorrow. But know that we are greater than we really think. But it's time to show our purpose, bro." 3 ideas connected in one breath. He's talking about death, about greatness, and about purpose. And he's linking them together like they're the same thing. Because you're going to die and because you're greater than you know, you need to act on your purpose now. Not tomorrow. Now. Because tomorrow isn't promised to anyone. This wasn't some throwaway line in a random text. This was something he'd been sitting with. Something he'd figured out in all those years of silence behind walls. And then he was gone. I've thought about that message every day since. How did he know? Not consciously, maybe, but something in him was wrapping things up. Something in him knew the clock was running out and he needed to say what mattered before it stopped. I appreciate you and never take you for granted. That's how he ended it. My brother never read a philosophy book in his life. Never studied psychology. He was a street dude, real as they come. The kind of man who learned from living, not from reading. But he figured out something in that cell that most people with degrees and libraries full of books never figure out. Something that scholars have spent thousands of pages trying to explain. He found in silence with nothing but time and his own mind. We are greater than we really think. That's the truth. Simple as he said it. No fancy words, no complicated framework, just the raw thing itself. And he had to go to prison to find it. He had to be stripped of everything, locked in a cage with no phone, no internet, no algorithm feeding him content, no distractions at all before he could hear what was true. Most people walking around free never discover what he discovered in a cage. They wake up, check their phone, get ready, scroll the feed, commute, pump content into their ears. Work, constant notifications, eat, more scrolling. Evening, Netflix and video games. Before bed, more phone, then sleep, then repeat. When in that day did they sit in silence to think with their own mind? Or when did the truth have room to speak? It didn't, because the noise never stopped. The input was constant. And every piece of content was another layer of static drowning out the signal that's been trying to reach them their whole life. My brother didn't have that option. The walls forced him into silence. The system meant to punish him accidentally gave him the one thing most free people never get: space to think. And in that space, something emerged. Something that was always there but couldn't get through. Like a voice in a crowded room that's been trying to speak but keeps getting talked over. The room finally went quiet and the voice could be heard. We greater than we really think. Makes you wonder who's really in prison. The man in the cell with nothing but his thoughts and time to think them? Or the man outside scrolling through his life, never once stopping long enough to ask if any of it actually matters? My brother found freedom in a cage. Most people find cages in their freedom, and he's not the only one. 1,500 years ago, on the other side of the world, another man sat in a cell waiting to die. And he found the exact same thing. His name was Boethius. And unless you studied medieval philosophy, you've probably never heard of him. But his story might be one of the most important ones ever told. Boethius was Roman, born around 480 AD into one of the most prestigious families in the empire. By the time he was in his 30s, he was one of the most powerful men alive: senator, consul, master of offices under King Theodoric the Great. He had wealth, status, influence, a wife he loved, sons he was proud of. Everything the world tells you to chase, he had. And he was brilliant. Fluent in Greek when most Romans had forgotten it. Translated Aristotle and Plato. Wrote treatises on music, mathematics, and logic. One of the great minds of his age, maybe any age. If you saw his life from the outside, you'd say he won. He had the career, the family, the reputation, and the legacy. He was at the top of the wheel, but that's the thing about wheels. They turn. In 523 AD, everything collapsed. Boethius was accused of treason. They said he was conspiring with the Byzantine emperor against King Theodoric. They said he was plotting to restore the old Roman Senate's power. They produced letters as evidence. Letters Boethius swore were forged. It didn't matter. The accusation was enough. He was arrested, stripped of his titles, his property, his reputation, separated from his family, thrown into a prison cell in Pavia to await execution. Think about that fall. One day you're among the most respected men in the civilized world. The next day you're in a cage, branded a traitor, everyone you thought was your ally turning their back, waiting for them to come kill you. He had every reason to despair. Everything he'd built was gone, not just gone, but reversed. His name wasn't just forgotten, it was disgraced. His legacy wasn't just ended, it was poisoned. He'd go down in history as a traitor, not a scholar, and he was going to die. Not peacefully in old age, surrounded by family. Executed like a criminal. Alone. This is where most men would break. Rage against the injustice. Sink into bitterness. Spend their final days cursing fate and everyone who betrayed them. Boethius did something else. In that cell, something appeared to him. It was not a guard, not a priest coming to hear his last confession, not an angel or a vision from God. It was a woman. He describes her in detail. Tall, with eyes that burned like fire. Her age was impossible to determine. Sometimes she seemed young, sometimes ancient. She wore a robe with 2 Greek letters embroidered on it, pi at the bottom, theta at the top, with a ladder of steps woven between them. The robe was old and torn, like many hands over many centuries had tried to rip pieces of her away. She carried books in one hand and a scepter in the other, and her name was Lady Philosophy. She walked into his cell where Boethius sat weeping, surrounded by the muses of poetry. He'd been writing sad verses about his fate, lamenting what he lost, putting his despair into words as poets do. Lady Philosophy looked at the muses and was not impressed. She called them theatrical whores of the stage. She said their sweet poison was making his condition worse, not better. They were feeding his sickness instead of curing it. She drove them away, sat down beside him, and said something that changed everything. If you want to be healed, you must expose your wound. This wasn't comfort, this wasn't sympathy, this wasn't someone telling him everything would be okay. This was diagnosis, this was surgery, this was someone saying your thinking is broken and I'm going to fix it. But first, you have to admit what's really wrong. Boethius looked at this woman who appeared from nowhere in his prison cell, speaking with an authority he'd never encountered, and he made a choice. He decided to listen. What happened next in that cell became one of the most influential books in Western history. The Consolation of Philosophy. Written by a condemned man in the final months of his life. A dialogue between a prisoner and a woman who may or may not have been real. A work that doesn't mention Christ, doesn't quote scripture, doesn't promise heaven or threaten hell. A work that takes a man from complete despair to genuine peace through nothing but reason and dialogue. Kings studied it, queens translated it, Dante drew from it, Chaucer translated it, Thomas Aquinas wrestled with it. For 1,000 years it was one of the most read books in Europe, second maybe only to the Bible. And it was written in a prison cell by a man waiting to die. They executed Boethius in 524 AD. The accounts say he was tortured first, a cord twisted around his head until his eyes burst from their sockets, then beaten with clubs until he died. A brutal end for one of the great minds of his age. But they couldn't kill what he found in that cell. The book survived. The ideas survived. The truth he discovered through dialogue with Lady Philosophy survived 15 centuries and crossed the ocean and is sitting in front of you right now. So again, we have two prisoners. Two cells, 1,500 years apart. One had every advantage education could offer. The other had the streets. One wrote a book that shaped Western civilization. The other sent letters from a prison cell. But they found the same thing, the same truth waiting in the same silence, the truth that only emerges when everything else is stripped away. My brother said it plain. We are greater than we really think. Boethius needed a whole book to explain it. 5 volumes of dialogue, arguments built on arguments. Lady Philosophy walking him step by step from despair to understanding. But it's the same destination. And if two men separated by 1,500 years can find the same truth in the same kind of silence, maybe the truth isn't something rare. Maybe it's something common, something always there, something any of us could find if we ever got quiet enough to hear it. What did Lady Philosophy say that took a man from wanting to die to being ready to die free? What was the consolation that philosophy offered a condemned man that religion couldn't match? And why does it matter for you right now in whatever invisible prison you're sitting in? That's what Boethius wrote down. That's what survived. That's what we need to understand, because Lady Philosophy didn't just visit him. She's been trying to visit you too. Lady Philosophy didn't come to comfort Boethius. She came to cure him. And like any real cure, it started by making things worse before they got better. She had to show him that everything he was crying about, everything he thought he lost, was never really his to begin with. That's the first lesson, the one that breaks you before it rebuilds you. The lesson of fortune. Boethius was mourning his old life. The wealth, the status, the reputation, the power. He had climbed to the top of Roman society, and now he was in a cell waiting to die in disgrace. Of course he was devastated. Anyone would be. Lady Philosophy listened to him pour out his grief. Then she asked him a question. Did fortune ever promise you she would stay? Think about that. When things were good, when Boethius had everything, did fortune ever sign a contract saying this will last forever? Did she ever guarantee that the wheel wouldn't turn? No. Fortune is a wheel, that's her nature. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're crushed beneath it. She spins and never stops spinning. If you happened to be riding high for a while, that wasn't fortune being loyal to you. That was just where you happened to be on the wheel at that moment. To complain when fortune turns against you is to misunderstand what fortune is. You can't be mad at fire for burning. You can't be mad at water for being wet. And you can't be mad at fortune for being fortunate, which means changeable, unpredictable, never staying in one place. Lady Philosophy puts it to him straight. Everything you're mourning right now, the wealth, the status, the reputation, none of it was ever yours. You were borrowing it. Fortune lent it to you for a while and now she's taking it back. That's not injustice. That's just fortune being fortune. If you build your identity on things fortune can take, then you're building on sand. And when the tide comes in, you'll be swept away every single time. Boethius pushes back. He says it's not just the external things, it's that he tried to do good. He served the state. He protected the innocent. He used his power for justice. And this is how he's repaid? Accused of crimes he didn't commit? Sentenced to death for treason he never plotted? Where's the justice in that? Lady Philosophy doesn't flinch. She tells him he's still missing the point. You did good things. Fine. But why did you do them? If you did them expecting fortune to reward you, then you were doing business, not virtue. You were trading good deeds for good outcomes, and now you're mad because fortune didn't hold up her end of the deal. But fortune never made that deal. You made it up in your head. You assumed that being good would protect you from suffering. That's not how any of this works. Virtue is its own reward. You do the right thing because it's right, not because you expect something back. The moment you attach conditions to it, the moment you expect payment, you've corrupted the whole thing. And the harder truth is that the wicked often prosper. The good often suffer. Fortune doesn't care about your moral scorecard. She spins the wheel and it lands where it lands. If you need the universe to be fair in order to have peace, you will never have peace. Because the universe, at least the external universe, doesn't owe you fairness. So where does that leave a man like Boethius? Everything external can be taken. Fortune owes him nothing. Justice doesn't protect him. Good deeds don't buy safety. What's left? Lady Philosophy answers with the most important idea in the whole book, the one thing fortune cannot touch. Your mind, not your brain. That's meat. They can damage that, and eventually they did. But your mind, your awareness, your capacity to reason, to understand, to choose how you interpret what happens to you. They took his wealth. They couldn't take his ability to think. They took his reputation. They couldn't take his ability to reason. They took his freedom of movement. They couldn't take the freedom inside his own head. No man can ever be deprived of what is truly his own. That's Lady Philosophy's core teaching. There's a kingdom inside you that no external force can invade. Circumstance can touch your body, your possessions, your social standing. It cannot touch the inner citadel unless you open the gates yourself. The Stoics talked about this centuries before Boethius. Epictetus, a former slave, taught that some things are within our control and some things aren't. Everything external falls into the second category. Your body, your property, your reputation, other people's actions, the circumstances of your birth and death. None of that is up to you. What is up to you? Your judgments, your choices, your responses, the meaning you assign to what happens, the interpretations you make, the thoughts you choose to entertain, and the ones you choose to dismiss. That's the kingdom. That's what you actually own. And it's the only thing you've ever owned. Boethius starts to get it, but he's not there yet. He still feels the loss. He still grieves what was taken. Lady Philosophy doesn't tell him to stop feeling. She's not asking him to pretend the pain isn't real. Instead, she walks him through a series of arguments, one by one, showing him why the things he lost were never going to satisfy him anyway. Start with wealth. What does wealth actually give you? Security? Only until someone takes it. Comfort? Only as long as circumstances allow. Freedom? You become a slave to protecting what you have. The more wealth you accumulate, the more you have to worry about. And no amount is ever enough. The appetite grows with the feeding. What about fame? Fame depends on other people's opinions. You don't control other people's opinions. You could do everything right and still be slandered. You could be the best person who ever lived and still be forgotten in a few generations. Or worse, remembered wrong. Fame is building your house on someone else's land. What about power? Power over others corrupts the one who holds it. And it breeds enemies. And it requires constant vigilance to maintain, and it still doesn't protect you from sickness, from death, from the 1,000 things no amount of power can prevent. The most powerful man in the world still gets a toothache. What about pleasure? Pleasure fades. The moment it's consumed, it's gone, and you need more. It never fills you for long. Chase pleasure as your highest good, and you become a rat pressing a lever, always needing the next hit, never actually arriving anywhere. Lady Philosophy goes through each one. Wealth, fame, power, pleasure. The things human beings spend their entire lives chasing. And she shows Boethius that none of them deliver what they promise. They all point toward happiness, but none of them get there. They can't, because they're all external. They're all subject to fortune. They're all things that can be given and taken away. So if happiness isn't in any of those places, where is it? Lady Philosophy says happiness is in the one place fortune can't reach, inside. In the mind that knows itself and governs itself. In the soul aligned with reason. In the internal kingdom that needs nothing external to be complete. This isn't about pretending you don't want things. It's not about becoming a monk or denying pleasure or giving away all your possessions. It's about where you locate your sense of self. If your identity is built on external things, you will always be at fortune's mercy. Every turn of the wheel will feel like life or death because in a sense it is. When the thing you think you are gets taken away, what's left? But if your identity is built on the internal kingdom, fortune can't touch you. She can take everything external and you're still there. Still whole. Still yourself. The wheel spins and you watch it spin, but you're not on it anymore. You're standing in the center where the motion can't reach. That's the consolation. That's what philosophy offers, not comfort, not sympathy, not promises of a better afterlife. Location. A place to stand where the storm can't reach. Now here's what most people miss when they hear about Boethius. He was a Christian, lived in a Christian world. Could have written a book where God appears to him, or an angel or a saint. Could have turned to faith, to prayer, to scripture. Could have found his consolation in the promise of heaven. He didn't. He chose Lady Philosophy, a figure from the pagan Greek tradition, a personification of reason, not revelation. And the book he wrote doesn't mention Christ, doesn't quote the Bible, doesn't rely on faith at all. Instead, it's built entirely on argument. Lady Philosophy doesn't tell Boethius what to believe. She asks him questions. He answers. She shows him where his thinking is flawed. He pushes back. She refines the point. Step by step, through pure reasoning, she leads him from despair to peace. This is the Socratic method, the approach the Greek philosophers used. The teacher doesn't inject truth into the student from outside. The teacher asks questions that help the student discover truth within. Lady Philosophy isn't bringing Boethius something new. She's helping him remember something he forgot. Something that was always in him but got buried under the noise of his former life. The business, the politics, the constant motion of being an important man in a busy world. The truth was already there. It just needed space to emerge. And that's exactly what happened to my brother. He didn't have Lady Philosophy appear to him in a robe with burning eyes. He didn't write a treatise on fortune and the inner kingdom. But the same thing happened in his cell that happened in Boethius's cell, 1500 years earlier. The noise stopped, the distractions disappeared, and something that was always there finally had room to speak. We are never promised tomorrow. Remember, we are greater than we really think. That's not a philosophical argument or a structured treatise. It's a man texting his friend on New Year's Eve with whatever truth had crystallized after years of forced silence. But break it down. Tomorrow isn't promised. That's the same thing Lady Philosophy says about fortune. You don't control the external. The future isn't guaranteed. Death is always closer than you think. We are greater than we really think. That's the internal kingdom. The part of you that's more than circumstance. The self underneath the self that fortune builds and fortune destroys. Time to show our purpose. That's the call to action. Not to waste the time you do have. Not to live small when you have the capacity for greatness. 3 ideas. Same ideas Boethius took a whole book to work through. My brother found them in silence and sent them in a text. Boethius walked to his execution a free man, not free in his body. They still killed him, still tortured him first, still destroyed his physical form in the most brutal way they could manage, but they couldn't touch what Lady Philosophy had shown him. The kingdom inside, the self that doesn't depend on fortune, the mind that found peace through reason and couldn't have that peace taken away. He wrote, The Consolation of Philosophy in the months before his death, knowing he was going to die, knowing there was no escape. And the book isn't bitter, isn't raging against injustice, isn't begging for salvation, it's calm, it's reasoned. It's the work of a man who found what he was looking for and wanted to leave it behind for anyone else who ended up in the same cell. The book survived, copied by monks for centuries, translated into every European language, read by kings and peasants and everyone in between. One of the most influential texts in Western history, and it was written by a condemned prisoner in the final chapter of his life. They killed Boethius. They couldn't kill what he found. But here's the question that nobody asks. Who was Lady Philosophy really? Boethius describes her appearing in his cell. He describes her features, her robe, her words, her manner. He presents her as a visitor, someone who came from outside to help him in his darkest hour. But think about it. He was alone in that cell. No one else saw her. No one else heard the dialogues. The conversations happened inside his mind, whether he framed them as external or not. So was Lady Philosophy a vision, a hallucination, a literary device, or was she something else? Was she the part of his own mind that finally had room to speak? The voice that had always been there underneath all the noise of his former life, waiting for the moment when everything else fell silent? Because if she was external, if she was some kind of supernatural visitation, then her message is limited. It's about one man getting special help in a special circumstance. Nice story, but not much use to anyone else. But if she was internal, if she was a part of Boethius himself that emerged in the silence, then her message changes everything. It means she's not just his. It means she's been waiting in every prison cell, every quiet moment, every space between distractions, trying to reach whoever finally gets still enough to hear her. It means she's been trying to reach you, who was Lady Philosophy. It's easy to read Boethius's book and treat her like a character, a literary device, something he invented to structure his arguments into a dialogue instead of a lecture. But that doesn't explain why he chose her. Boethius was a Christian living in a Christian world. His whole society was organized around the church. When people suffered, they prayed. When they faced death, they called for a priest. The afterlife was the answer to every earthly injustice. You might suffer here, but heaven awaits if you keep the faith. Boethius could have written that book, An angel appears in his cell. Christ himself visits the condemned man. The Virgin Mary offers comfort. Any of those would have fit his world perfectly. His readers would have expected it. Instead, he chose a woman from pagan Greece, a personification of human reason, a figure the church had spent centuries trying to replace with revelation and scripture. And the book he wrote doesn't mention Jesus, doesn't quote the Bible, doesn't talk about heaven or hell or salvation through faith. A Christian man facing execution wrote a book about finding peace, and God is barely in it. Why? Because Boethius understood something most people still don't. The truth doesn't need to be delivered from outside, it's already inside. The only thing preventing you from hearing it is noise. Think about what Lady Philosophy actually represents in the text. She appears when Boethius is alone, cut off from the world, stripped of every distraction, no business to attend to, no social obligations, no politics to navigate, no reputation to maintain. Just him and the silence of his cell. She doesn't arrive from somewhere else. She emerges, like she was always there waiting but couldn't get through before. The noise of his former life was too loud. The important man doing important things in the important world didn't have room for her. Only when all of that was taken away could she make herself heard. That's not a visitor from outside. That's a part of himself that finally had space to speak. Your mind has layers. There's the part you identify with, the voice in your head, the constant narrator commenting on everything, worrying about the future, replaying the past, judging and planning and reacting. That's the loud part, the part that never shuts up, the part most people think is them. But underneath that voice is something else, a deeper layer of awareness that doesn't speak in words most of the time. It processes information you don't consciously notice. It makes connections you can't trace. It knows things you don't know you know. Some people call it the subconscious. Some call it intuition. Some call it the higher self or the inner voice or gut feeling. Different names for the same thing. This part of you is always running. It's always aware and always processing. But it doesn't get much airtime because the loud part dominates. The narrator never stops talking, and as long as it's talking, the deeper voice can't get through, until the narrator gets forced into silence. That's what happens in those rare moments of flow when you lose yourself in something and time disappears. That's what happens in crisis sometimes when the shock is so great that the narrator short-circuits and something deeper takes over. And that's what happens in a prison cell when everything else gets stripped away. The narrator runs out of things to narrate. The part of you that's always planning and scheming and worrying suddenly has nothing to work with. Fortune has taken everything. The future is fixed. There's nothing left to manage. And in that emptiness, the deeper voice finally has room. Lady Philosophy isn't external. She's the part of Boethius that knew the truth all along but couldn't get through until the noise stopped. She's his own deeper mind, personified into a figure he could have a dialogue with. And she's not unique to him. My brother heard the same voice. He didn't see a woman in a robe with burning eyes. He didn't have philosophical dialogue structured into 5 books. He was a street dude, not a Roman scholar. His version came through different, but it was the same source. Years in a cell. He had smartphone, no internet, and no algorithm deciding what thoughts to feed him. There was no endless scroll of content competing for his attention. Just him and whatever came up when there was nothing to distract him from himself. And something came up. We are greater than we really think. That's not something he read somewhere or something someone taught him. That's something that emerged from the silence. The deeper voice that had been waiting his whole life to speak, finally getting a chance because there was nothing left to drown it out. Lady Philosophy visits everyone who gets quiet enough to hear her. She's been trying to visit you too. every moment of real stillness, every gap between distractions, every space where the noise drops for a second. She's there trying to get through. Most people fill those gaps immediately. Phone out, music on, anything to keep from sitting in silence with their own mind. They're not avoiding boredom. They're avoiding her. They're avoiding what they might hear if they ever stopped running long enough to listen. But here's where Boethius takes it somewhere most people never go. Lady Philosophy doesn't just comfort him. She doesn't pat his head and tell him everything will be okay. She argues with him, she uses logic, and she makes him think. The entire consolation is structured as a rational argument. Premise leads to conclusion. She asks questions, he answers, she shows him the flaw in his thinking. He refines his position, she builds on that refinement. Step by step, through nothing but reason, she walks him from despair to peace. No faith is required, there is no revelation from outside, no believing something because an authority said so. Just thinking, carefully, rigorously, honestly, following the logic wherever it leads. This is the Socratic method, the way the Greek philosophers taught. The teacher doesn't pour knowledge into the student like water into an empty cup. The teacher asks questions that help the student discover what they already know but haven't recognized yet. Lady Philosophy isn't giving Boethius new information. She's helping him see what was already in his own mind. The truth was there before she arrived, she just helped him uncover it. That's a fundamentally different model than religion offers. Religion says truth comes from outside, right? God speaks to prophets. Prophets write scriptures, priests interpret scriptures, you listen to the priests. The chain of authority runs from heaven down to you. And your job is to receive what's handed down and believe it. If you want to know what's true, you don't figure it out yourself. You ask the people who have access to the source. You trust the institution. You have faith. Faith means believing without direct evidence. Believing because you trust the one who told you. Believing because the book says so, or the church says so, or the tradition says so. The emphasis is on submission, on receiving, on accepting what you're given. Philosophy, at least the way Lady Philosophy practices it, works completely differently. Truth comes from inside. Your own mind has the capacity to reason. Logic is the same for everyone. If you think carefully and honestly, you can figure things out yourself. You don't need a priest to mediate between you and reality. You don't need to take anyone's word for it. You can know directly. This doesn't mean you ignore what others have learned. Boethius was deeply educated. He'd read everything. Lady Philosophy builds on the work of Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics. But the point is that he can check their work. He can follow the arguments himself. He's not believing Plato because Plato said so. He's believing Plato because Plato's reasoning holds up when examined. That's the difference. Faith asks you to trust the source. Reason asks you to verify the argument. And this creates two completely different kinds of people. The faith path creates people who need authority, who need someone to tell them what's true, who feel lost without a book or a church or a leader to follow. Take away their external source of truth, and they don't know what to believe anymore. The reason path creates people who are self-sufficient, who can evaluate claims for themselves, who don't need anyone's permission to figure out what's real. Take away every authority and they still have their own mind. They can still think. They can still find their way. Lady Philosophy was making Boethius self-sufficient. She wasn't creating dependency on herself. She was showing him how to find truth on his own so he wouldn't need her anymore. That's why she could leave. That's why the dialogues end. She gave him the tools, and the tools work without her. Try that with religion. Stop going to church. Stop reading scripture. Stop praying. Does the faith sustain itself? Or does it need constant reinforcement from external sources? There's a whole tradition of thinkers who understood this. who trusted reason over revelation, who believed the human mind, properly used, could access truth directly. Pythagoras 2,500 years ago teaching that reality itself is mathematical, that the deepest truths aren't stories about gods but relationships between numbers, that the mind can grasp the structure of existence through pure thought. Plato with his theory of forms. The idea that the physical world is shadows on a cave wall and the real world is the world of pure ideas that the mind can access through reason. You don't learn the truth by looking harder at the shadows. You learn it by turning around and thinking your way toward the light. Aristotle systematizing logic itself, creating the tools of clear thinking that would be used for 2,000 years. Showing that reason has rules and if you follow them you can avoid error. The Stoics teaching that the rational soul is a fragment of the cosmic reason that orders the universe. That to live according to reason is to align yourself with the deepest nature of reality. That the mind governing itself is the highest achievement a human can reach. Then later, after the long sleep of the medieval period, reason woke up again. Descartes, stripping away everything that could be doubted until he hit the one thing that couldn't be. I think, therefore I am, starting from that foundation and trying to rebuild knowledge through pure logic. Spinoza constructing his entire philosophy like a geometry proof. Definitions, axioms, propositions, demonstrations. No appeals to faith, no relying on authority, just reason following itself to its conclusions. Leibniz with his monads and his calculus and his vision of a universal language of thought that could resolve any dispute through calculation. Hegel tracing the self-development of idea through history. Mind coming to know itself through the long process of thesis and antithesis and synthesis. A golden thread running through centuries, different thinkers, different systems, different conclusions sometimes, but the same underlying faith. Not faith in God, faith in reason. Faith that the mind can know. Faith that you don't need external authority to access truth. This tradition terrified the people in power. Think about why. Religion needs you to need it. The whole structure depends on you not being able to access truth yourself. If you could just figure things out through reason, why would you need priests? Why would you need the church? Why would you tithe? Why would you obey? The church didn't suppress philosophy because philosophy was wrong. They suppressed it because philosophy was dangerous. A person who can think for themselves is a person who might think their way out of the system. Giordano Bruno burned at the stake in 1600 for teaching ideas the church didn't like. They put a spike through his tongue so he couldn't speak as he died. That's how scared they were of what reason could do. Even science, which claims to be based on reason, has become its own kind of church. With its own priests in lab coats, its own scriptures in peer-reviewed journals, its own dogmas you're not allowed to question. Try questioning certain scientific orthodoxies and see how fast you get excommunicated, and capitalism needs you needy most of all. The entire consumer economy runs on you feeling incomplete, on you believing that the next purchase will fill the void. If you found sufficiency within yourself, if Lady Philosophy taught you that the inner kingdom needs nothing external, you'd stop buying. The whole machine grinds to a halt when people realize they already have enough. Every system of control has the same enemy, a mind that can think for itself, a person who doesn't need external authority to know what's true. A human being who found Lady Philosophy in their own cell and doesn't need priests or politicians or experts or influencers to tell them what's real anymore. That's why the tradition got buried. That's why most people have never heard of it. That's why you can go through 16 years of education and never once be taught how to actually think. They don't want you to find her. They need you looking outside, scrolling for answers, consuming content that promises to tell you who you are and what's true. Dependent on their platforms, their institutions, their products, their systems, a population of people who found lady philosophy would be ungovernable, unmarketable, free in a way that makes control impossible. My brother found her anyway. No philosophy degree, no knowledge of Boethius or Pythagoras or any of the tradition. Just years of forced silence and a mind that eventually got quiet enough to hear what was always there. We are greater than we really think. That's lady philosophy speaking through a man who never heard her name. The same voice that spoke to Boethius in 524 AD speaking to a prisoner in the 2020s. The same truth that's been waiting in every cell, every quiet moment, every gap in the noise. She doesn't need you to know the tradition. She doesn't need you to read the books. She doesn't care about your education level or your background or your circumstances. She just needs you to get quiet. Quiet enough to hear her. Quiet enough to remember what you forgot. Quiet enough to discover that the truth was never outside you, never in some book or church or institution, never dependent on anyone else's authority. It was always inside, waiting. Will you ever stop running long enough to find it? Boethius didn't choose his cell. The king's guards came for him, stripped him of everything, and threw him in a cage to wait for death. He had no say in the matter. My brother didn't choose his cell either. The system took him, processed him, assigned him a number and a bunk and years of his life behind walls. By the time he understood what was happening, the door was already locked. But you're different. You're in a prison too. But nobody forced you into it. No guards came for you in the night. No judge handed down a sentence. No system processed you against your will. You walked in yourself. You keep walking in every single day. And the door isn't even locked. You could leave any time you wanted, but you don't. Think about your day yesterday, not what you wish it looked like, what it actually looked like. You woke up and before your feet hit the floor, your hand was already reaching for your phone, notifications waiting, messages to check, a quick scroll through whatever app pulls you hardest. You weren't even fully conscious yet and you were already consuming. You got ready with something playing in the background, music, podcast, video, something. Silence felt weird, so you filled it. You commuted with content pumping into your ears, couldn't just sit there with nothing. Couldn't just look out the window and think, had to have input. You worked with notifications pinging, emails, messages, alerts. Even when you were focused on something, part of your brain was waiting for the next interruption, hoping for it maybe. The ping gives you something, a little hit, a little break from whatever you were doing. You ate while watching something, scrolling something. Couldn't just eat and taste the food and sit with yourself for 20 minutes. Had to double up. Had to consume content while consuming calories. Evening came and you were tired. You'd earned some rest, so you watched something, scrolled something, played something. More input, more content, more noise filling every corner of your mind. Then bed. And what did you do before you slept? You scrolled, you checked, you consumed, right up until the moment your eyes couldn't stay open anymore. And then you woke up and did it all again. When in that day did you sit in silence with your own mind? When did Lady Philosophy have room to speak? She didn't. Because you never gave her the chance. Every moment that could have been silence, you filled. Every gap that could have been space, you stuffed with content. You built a wall of noise around yourself so thick that nothing from inside could get through. And you did it voluntarily. Nobody made you. Nobody forced the phone into your hand. Nobody required you to fill every second with input. You chose it. You choose it every single day. That's what makes your prison different from Boethius's cell, different from my brother's cage. Their prisons were imposed from outside. They had no choice but to face the silence. The walls forced them into the confrontation they'd been avoiding their whole lives. Your prison is self-constructed, self-maintained, self-chosen. You're the architect and the guard and the prisoner all at once, And the bars aren't made of steel, they're made of content. Why do you do this? It's not because the content is so great. Half the stuff you consume you don't even remember an hour later. It passes through you without leaving a trace. You're not actually enjoying it most of the time, you're just doing it. It's not because you're so busy. You have hours every day that you spend consuming content. If you added them up, you'd be horrified. That's not a schedule problem, that's a choice problem. So why? Because you're afraid of what you'll hear if you get quiet. The noise isn't filling you. It's protecting you. Every scroll, every video, every podcast, every notification is another layer of insulation between you and whatever's waiting in the silence. And something is waiting. You know it. You can feel it in those rare moments when the noise stops unexpectedly. That uncomfortable feeling that rises up. That anxiety that comes from nowhere. That restlessness that makes you reach for your phone like a reflex. That's not boredom. That's fear. Fear of what's underneath. Fear of what you might find out about yourself and your life if you ever stopped running long enough to look. Lady Philosophy is waiting in there. And part of you knows that if you let her speak, she's going to say things you don't want to hear. She's going to ask you about your life, about whether you're living your purpose or running from it, about whether the path you're on is actually yours or just the one you stumbled into, about whether you're becoming who you're capable of being or just getting older while staying the same. She's going to point out the gap between what you know you could be and what you're actually doing. She's going to show you all the ways you've been playing small, all the potential you've been burying, all the years you've been sleepwalking through instead of actually living. That's a hard conversation to have. Easier to just scroll, easier to fill the silence with noise, easier to stay in the comfortable prison than to face what freedom actually requires. Boethius couldn't avoid the conversation. Lady Philosophy showed up and wouldn't leave until they'd worked through everything. He had nowhere to run. No phone to reach for, no content to hide behind. Just her and him and the truth he'd been avoiding. My brother couldn't avoid it either. Years in a cell with nothing to distract him, nowhere to escape. Just time and silence and whatever came up when there was nothing left to push it down. They found what they found because they had no choice. The confrontation was forced on them. You have a choice. And so far you've been choosing to avoid it. Every single day you choose the noise over the silence, the scroll over the stillness, the comfortable prison over the terrifying freedom. And you can keep choosing that. Nobody's going to stop you. The algorithms will keep feeding you content. The platforms will keep competing for your attention. The noise will keep filling every gap you offer it. You can live your whole life in that prison. Most people do. They go from cradle to grave without ever once sitting in real silence with their own mind. They never meet Lady Philosophy. They never find out what they might have heard if they'd ever stopped running. They die without ever knowing what my brother knew, what Boethius knew, what anyone who's ever gotten quiet enough has discovered. We are greater than we really think. But you have to get quiet to hear it. And you have to be willing to face whatever else comes up first. Because the truth isn't the first thing that emerges when the noise stops. First comes the discomfort, the anxiety, the restlessness that makes you want to reach for your phone immediately. Then comes the stuff you've been pushing down, the fears, the regrets, the things you don't want to think about, the gap between who you are and who you meant to be. That's the part most people run from. They dip a toe into silence, feel the discomfort rising, and immediately fill the gap with noise again. They think the discomfort is the problem. They think getting quiet is supposed to feel peaceful, and when it doesn't, they assume they're doing it wrong. But the discomfort isn't the problem, it's the doorway. You have to go through it to get to what's on the other side. Boethius had to face his despair before Lady Philosophy could cure it. He had to feel the full weight of what he'd lost before she could show him what couldn't be taken. The dialogue starts with him weeping, remember? surrounded by the muses of poetry writing sad verses about his fate. That's where the journey begins, in the pain. My brother had to sit with whatever he sat with for years before the truth crystallized. I don't know what came up for him in that cell, what demons he had to face, what regrets he had to process, what fears he had to move through. But something happened in that silence. Something got worked through, and on the other side of it was clarity, we greater than we really think. But time to show our purpose. That's not where he started, that's where he arrived. After the journey through whatever the silence brought up first. You want the clarity without the journey. You want lady philosophy without the discomfort. You want to hear that you're greater than you think without having to face all the ways you've been acting smaller than you are. That's not how it works. The silence isn't comfortable because you haven't been living comfortably with yourself. You've been running. And when you stop running, you have to face what you were running from. But here's what Boethius learned. Here's what my brother found. The stuff you're running from isn't as bad as the running itself. The fears you won't face control you more than they would if you faced them. The regrets you won't process poison you more than they would if you processed them. The truths you won't hear own you more than they would if you heard them. The prison of noise isn't protecting you. It's preserving the power of everything you're avoiding, keeping it locked in the basement where it runs your life from the shadows. Face it and it loses its grip. That's what lady philosophy offers, not escape from the hard truths, but liberation through them. I think about my brother's message all the time. December 31st, New Year's Eve. If I don't get to talk to you personally, bro. He was wrapping things up. Something in him knew even if he didn't know consciously. He was saying what mattered while he still could. We are never promised tomorrow. That's true for him. It's true for Boethius. It's true for you. You're acting like you have unlimited time. Like you can keep scrolling for another decade and then eventually, someday when things calm down, you'll get around to facing yourself. You'll get around to the silence. You'll get around to finding out what you're actually capable of. Tomorrow isn't promised. You know this. Everyone knows this, but you're not living like you know it. You're living like the noise will always be there and the silence can always wait, and lady philosophy will still be around whenever you finally decide to show up. Maybe. Maybe not. So we are greater than we really think. That's the truth waiting in your silence. The same truth that was waiting in Boethius's cell. The same truth my brother found in his. You are not what you've been told. You are not as small as you've been acting. You are not the limited, distracted, scrolling creature you've become. Underneath all that noise is something that has always known what you're capable of. Something that has been waiting your whole life for you to stop running long enough to remember. But it's time to show our purpose, bro. Not tomorrow, not when things calm down. Not after you finish this next episode or scroll through this next feed or get through this next week. Now. Because we are never promised tomorrow, and you've already spent enough of your life in a prison you built for yourself. Boethius wrote his book in a cell waiting to die. He didn't know how much time he had. Weeks maybe, months at best. And instead of spending that time in despair, he spent it in dialogue with the deepest part of himself. He spent it discovering what couldn't be taken from him. He spent it creating something that would outlast his executioners by 15 centuries. My brother sent his message on New Year's Eve. He didn't know it would be one of his last. He wasn't trying to leave a legacy. He was just telling his friend what he'd figured out in all those years of silence. We are greater than we really think. Simple words from a man who didn't read philosophy books. But the same truth that lady philosophy spent 5 volumes teaching Boethius. The same truth the whole rationalist tradition has been trying to articulate for 2,500 years. You don't need to go to prison to find it. You don't need to read Boethius or study the tradition or understand the philosophy. You just need to get quiet. Quiet enough to hear what's been waiting. Quiet enough to face what you've been running from. Quiet enough to let Lady Philosophy speak. She's been there your whole life. In every moment of stillness you filled with noise. In every gap you stuffed with content. In every silence you couldn't tolerate. She's there right now, waiting to tell you what Boethius heard in his cell. What my brother heard in his. What everyone who has ever gotten truly quiet has discovered. That fortune can take everything external, but she can't touch what you really are. That the inner kingdom needs nothing outside itself. That the mind aligned with reason is free no matter what cage surrounds the body. That you're greater than you've been told. Greater than you've been acting. Greater than the small, distracted, addicted creature the algorithms have turned you into. I can't make that choice for you. Nobody can. That's the whole point. Lady Philosophy doesn't drag you into the dialogue, she waits. She's been waiting your whole life, and she'll wait the rest of it if that's what you choose. But my brother is gone now. He found the truth, and then he left. And I'm sitting here with his words on my phone, knowing what he knew, trying to pass it along to whoever's ready to hear it. We are never promised tomorrow. We are greater than we really think. And it's time to show our purpose. That was his message. Not just to me. To anyone willing to listen. To anyone who's been scrolling long enough and running hard enough and filling the silence loud enough. You can keep going the way you've been going. Keep the noise on. Keep the prison built. Keep Lady Philosophy waiting in a room you never enter. Or you can stop. Not tomorrow. Not after this video. Not when you feel ready. Now. Put the phone down. Turn the content off. Sit in the silence you've been avoiding your whole life. And find out what's been waiting for you there. 2 prisoners found it. 1,500 years apart. The same truth in the same silence. Your cell is available anytime you choose to enter it. Lady Philosophy is already there. She's always been there. She's wondering if you'll ever show up.